today I had a very lengthy conversation with a friend about, again, it ended up being a conversation about happiness, but it started out with a question about romance. And I think this kind of a question happens to be a very common one. And the gist of the question is this: should I date around, or should I wait for the one? And as a former guy who, sought a lot of love, I think this is an important question for the teenagers and the young adults who might not be that, well versed in dating yet, and you're about to venture into dating, but why is this a dilemma in the first place? Well, because you know, um, dating is kind of like, what if you invest emotionally into the wrong person? What if you get a lot of heartache? I think actually, if you look at the progression of dating in the early ages, it sort of nobody starts out in the world when they're born. They're like, oh my god, I need to date somebody, right? It's a kind of an acquired social behavior where you kind of come into consciousness and then you look around and then suddenly you develop a sexuality and like, whoa, I like guys, whoa, I like girls, and then they make me feel a certain way and such. And there's always in a social group, there's always like the early adopters to relationships. Some people start their relationship journey super fast, but then like when kids are young, there's always that like cootie and booger phase, right? Like, oh, you hung out with a girl, you get cooties and things like that. But in adolescence, as you develop, as human sexuality develops, then you kind of like advance into, whoa, like suddenly I find myself physically attracted to another person and so on. So I think the important distinction here to make is that attraction tends to have kind of like two sides to it. Number one is purely physical. Hey, you know what, I don't know if I love your humanhood. I don't know if I want to get to know you deep and intimately. I don't know if I want to know about your childhood and talk about our future together. But uh, you and I, very compatible physically, and then that's fine, right? And in the olden times where the values around sexuality were more conservative, and we tried to abstain and things like that. I think as much as abstinence was the primary talking point back then, people still had sex, right? And so I think that's why it's important to, yeah, you could preach abstinence, but at the same time you need to talk about proper birth control and sex education and so on. And so one side of it is sexual, but the other side of it is like what you might call platonic love, right? And this is purely just a human to human kind of a connection. Now, because you are most likely a young person watching this video, there's a chance that you might not know what happens after marriage. So, after marriage, there are married couple who go on to continue to have physical relation. They basically have sex, right? Well into their old golden years. There are people who kind of like stop, and they just become the co-parents of their offspring. And then there are people who kind of engage in open relationships, and there are people who just don't have children, but then just kind of like it further develops into this kind of a deep and intimate friendship, right? And so I think they don't have to be one, right? I think it's perfectly fine for you to pursue sexual outlets and like relationships based on physical attraction, but it's important that your partner and you are both at sync with that, right? If one person wants a deeper emotional connection and less of the sex stuff, but if you're all about sex, it's just kind of like mismatching and expectations, right? But here's where things get a little bit hairy. We think that when we have a disagreement, then it has to be unpleasant. And I think that's the biggest misconception about relationships, and I think that's what kind of motivates this kind of like, should I pick one or the other, right? We want to minimize heartbreak because heartbreak tends to come after a happy relationship and then it turns sour, right? And then now all the beautiful memories are suddenly like making you hurt a lot more and things like that. But what if it doesn't have to be like that? There aren't a lot of love songs about happy breakups unless it's like, oh, you're a fucking bitch, I hate you, like, or you're a dick, and I never want to see you again. Yeah, yeah, those are kind of like good riddance kind of songs. And or it's like driver's license, right? Like, oh, the driver's license is such a sad song. But anyway, but it's possible to disengage in relationships in a happy way, right? Because hey, you gave it a shot and it didn't work. And why it didn't work? Anything can be the reason, right? You might not have been physically compatible. You might not have been emotionally compatible. You may have different trajectories in life. You wanted to go to college in New York, and you want to go to college in California. Okay, and that way, but you want to keep it physical, then you physically can't unless you can teleport, right? And these things, we automatically assume that breaking up and ending of relationships have to be hurting. And I think that is where you can really benefit, especially if you haven't started relationships yet, right? If you have a perspective going into relationships, entering into relationships about how can I be happy outside of relationships as much as I am happy inside of the relationship. And now you might be thinking right now, wow, that's super vague, right? Well, so if we get just a little bit into the mechanics of what makes a heartbreak so deeply hurting is attachment, right? Why don't you want to break up? Because I always want to keep you in my life. I want to control you. We think it's because I love you so much, but no. If you truly love someone, you want them to be happy, right? And if their happiness doesn't involve you, if you truly love that person, you kind of make that happen, right? So, why does it hurt? Oh, but I want you, but then you don't want me. That's fine. If you truly love that person, that's fine. You can respect and continue to love this person as this person doesn't want to engage with you anymore. The reason why it hurts is but I really, really, really want you to change your mind. It's this attachment to wanting to control this person. And we oftentimes mistake that for love. And honestly, I think a lot of, and this isn't just related to dating, I think a lot of marriages end up in a deep, deep conflict because both parties are not really that willing to change themselves for the sake of the partner. But at the same time, they both want to change their partner, right? And that's a recipe. It's not a recipe for, I think, it's not a guaranteed recipe for the disaster. But think about this. You and your romantic partner, suppose you meet at 16 years. That means you spent 16 years of your life not even knowing each other's existence. Therefore, yeah, if you only see each other at school, then you might see some compatible things. But then when you start to live together, you're gonna see that, wow, you and I are really different. And that is not a problem. That's to be expected. If you don't want to change for another person, you just gotta live alone. If you want to date, you have to be willing to change. And even if you don't want to change, you have to be willing to give a shot at least an honest attempt at kind of making things meet in the middle, right? If your personality were like rays of light, you might have 10 rays of light that deviate this way, but then you have one ray of light that goes this way. And it's this ray of light that happens to coincide with your romantic partner while their rays all go out to that way as well. So, if you both can agree to keep it super casual, then I think it's good. But if you want to escalate it to the next level, but they don't, then you have to meet them in the middle. right? If you want to give it a shot. If not, it's also fine to be like, okay, you know what? I tried it, but then it's not gonna work. So I think we can part ways now. And I think anyone who has went through a bad breakup can agree that a clean goodbye prior to a deepening of a attached desire to control another person is way better than having experienced that deep attachment and control, and then having to break away from it. But if you are experiencing one of those breakups, hey, it can be a very good food for your soul later down the line, as long as you look at it from the perspective of continuous spiritual growth. But since this video is geared more towards the young people, I want you to keep thinking about how can breakups be peaceful and happy, and what is love if it is not lust? If it is not the desire to control? If it is not an attachment? Then what is love? I think these are the actual important things about emotional aspect of relationships. Just like how birth control and sex education is important for the physical side of relationships, I think these big questions that I just posed are the kind of the sex ed for emotional relationships.